Recording in progress.
Well, I know that Jennifer is here, so we are going to get started so we can get started on time. Hello, hello, everybody. There she is. All righty. Welcome to the SpeechLink podcast. Today, speech drives language, even for those with Down syndrome, part 2. I hope that you saw part 1 that we did last month. If not, Jennifer is going to give us a brief review. But before we get started, let's cover disclosures. Here we go. Regarding financial disclosures, Jennifer receives an honorarium for this podcast and does other presentations through SpeechTherapyPD.com and others such as LSVT Global. She also receives royalties for her new children's and parents book, I Can Learn. More on that later. Regarding non-financial disclosures, Jennifer is the Therapy Work Group Chair for the Down Syndrome Medical Interest Group. Personally, I too receive an honorarium for this podcast. I am a regular seminar presenter for SpeechTherapyPD.com, and I own Speech Dynamics, Inc. I have no non-financial disclosures. All right. So glad to see so many of you here for part 2 for this live SpeechLink podcast, sponsored, of course, by SpeechTherapyPD.com. I'm Char Boshart, your speech-language pathologist host, and you are more than welcome to participate during our time together. Just type your question or a comment into the chat, and either I or Jennifer will read it and she will respond. Jennifer Gray, MSCCC-SLP, has over 20 years of experience as a licensed speech-language pathologist and specializes in communication for those with Down syndrome. She owns 2 private practices, one in Colorado and the other in Texas, offers consultation services worldwide, and teaches courses for families and professionals at conferences, schools, as well as virtual CE courses. She collaborates with organizations such as Gigi's Playhouse, LSVT Global, and the Down Syndrome Medical Interest Group. She promotes the capabilities of those with Down syndrome to guide best practices, ways to strengthen advocacy efforts, and how to improve communication abilities. Her work focuses on speech clarity as the path to autonomy for those with Down syndrome. And her new children's book, I Can Learn, supports just that. The book is appropriate for parents and SLPs to use with their young children, and it's the first book in a soon-to-be published series. She's a very popular guest here on the SpeechLink, so welcome back to part 2 of the SpeechLink, Jennifer.
Thank you.
Yes.
Glad to be here.
Oh, I'm glad you're here too. I've been looking forward to this.
It's
All
too
right,
hard
let's
to get everything
jump in.
into one.
It is. It's probably going to be hard to get everything into 2, but
let's try to stay on track.
Let's jump in here. In part 1, you gave us some really good, I'm going to say, information, foundational information as to how speech drives language in those with Down syndrome. So if you would transition us to part 2, give us a brief overview of part 1's information, basically where you are coming from, so we have a sense as to where you are going.
Okay, great. So we talked a little bit last time about why the importance of speech, and that it's not just language. And we all know that communication kind of wraps everything together. But with this population specifically, speech is something that we really need to target as a pathway and as something that we're going to use throughout the lifespan. So as that pathway to better language. And what we're seeing, or what I'm seeing at least in my populations for doing this for so long, is that when we don't look at speech at those younger ages and we don't facilitate speech, we're seeing these huge gaps in language, regardless of AAC being used or pictures or sign language, all those other wonderful ways of communicating initially. If we don't remember to come back to those specific developmental speech learning periods, we end up skipping them. And now we're 8 years old and we still have an MLU of 3 because maybe we didn't learn grammar and syntax because we didn't practice speech enough. And we expect it to show up just like it does in kind of typical populations where we kind of facilitate it and then it just kind of keeps going on its own and gets better. But the main difference between that child and a child with Down syndrome is that they're not getting nearly enough speech practice. They stay in early stages of babbling much longer than they should. Then they stay in
Okay.
those babbling phases in a much shorter amount of time than they should, because we're pushing that language envelope constantly, trying to get them to more of a typical peer by the age of 5, for example. And what that does is we don't allow those speech windows to actually be open. And so we skip things. And we don't quite realize why at 8 or 12, we have a child who really isn't progressing. So that's kind of the big piece of it. So we need speech to improve language. And so the easiest way to see that is grammar and syntax. Those are the two things that are left out of sign language, pictures, and devices. Some newer devices, but those take years to kind of evolve to get to that place. And so we have a lot of telegraphic speech. Our kids say 1, 2, 3 words at a time, and it's mom, go, ball, please, want, drink, right? We're in these kind of just sporadic type speech acts because that's all they've done. And so without us facilitating that those need to be longer and giving that child many, 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 many repetitions of speech like a typical child gets, we aren't going to see it get better. So we're going to see language stall, and we're going to see strange splinter skills because they'll have some but not others, and we're kind of confused. You did it yesterday. What's going on here? And then just the way they learn is different. And so once you know some things about Down syndrome, because that's one thing that I know SLPs don't get, there's no courses in school. There's very few courses to take to learn about how to help that child on your caseload. And you might only have 1 or 5, right? You're probably not doing what I'm doing, where all I do is Down syndrome. What do you do with those kids, especially if you might be the 5th or 6th SLP that child has had, right? And so what do we, in terms of looking at a 5-year-old or a 3-year-old, as an 18-year-old, what do we need? Speech. Because most people with Down syndrome, 90% and above, are going to use speech. They're going to choose to use speech because that's natural. That's what's around them, regardless of what they've practiced in the past. And so we have a lot of people out there with Down syndrome who are talking, but no one's really understanding them. And we've kind of just left that to be, oh, that's Down syndrome. But is it? What if that person had had early speech? What if we knew back in the babbling stages that we need to facilitate that? And how do we do that? And a lot of it is parent education. And so those early intervention type things, how can we teach parents to interact with their children better so that we have a better chance of going through those developmental stages and actually having speech that's functional and helps them learn in the future. So that's kind of the big ball.
Yeah. Yeah.
Then there's that
very
piece
good
of, cognition, which is delayed, but they only tend to have mild to moderate cognitive delays or cognitive disabilities. And so we would expect their language skills to be higher, but they aren't. And that's kind of the Down syndrome. That's what makes it quite unique. And from here is it really isn't because of an intellectual disability, not all of it. But our speech and our language is much worse than we would expect it to be for their cognitive profile. And I believe that that's just that lack of practice. We didn't give them what they needed to practice that to get them to a place where it becomes autonomous and functional. And so I know we talk a lot about that. We don't always give a lot of the techniques. And so hopefully today I'll do some of that where we can kind of talk about, I'm just going to talk about 3 main techniques that you guys can use, and then you can go off and, more in depth and look at them, because this is probably a 12-hour talk if we did it here. But
okay. What are the 3?
The 3, the one that I'm going to talk about today. So we'll look at conversation. And speech is conversation. Right?
Right.
If that wasn't true, none of this would matter. And so speech isn't just to label and learn. It's the whole reason that human beings are social. And so it's just a huge part of us that we've kind of left on the wayside with Down syndrome.
Yeah. Well, and kids with Down syndrome are so very social. Very social. I'm sorry to interrupt. But
no, they are.
That was like this huge aha.
It's a strength, and then it becomes a weakness. So I can talk about that if people are interested in
that. That's good. So that's one. And then what's another one?
Reading. So and by reading, I don't mean literacy. I mean reading.
Right. Okay.
People with Down syndrome can learn to read, sometimes on their own, very, very early, 18 months.
Really?
Some, not all. And so if you
Really?
know that, if you know the strengths, you can much easier find ways to deal with those needs or with those challenges.
Okay.
So we'll talk
Okay.
about how you can use that.
Okay. And what's the third way?
And the
Third
third way
thing.
is going to be voice. And
Okay.
so what is it that makes these children so difficult to understand?
Uh-huh.
A hint, it's not consonants, it's vowels, it's voice, prosody, rate, rhythm,
Okay.
pragmatics, all those, that's more
Okay.
language,
Okay.
but
All right.
that's what's really inhibiting us from getting clear speech. And so if we look at voice through that voice lens,
Yeah.
that's going to help us better treat that speech clarity piece instead of
Yeah.
determining if what their articulation delays are or what their phonology is like. And then motor speech is in there.
Yeah.
How do you do all this when there's so many things to work on? When people with Down syndrome have multiple
Yeah.
speech and language disorders at the same time forever. So what do you do with
Okay.
that? You have to
Okay.
find one or two techniques that do everything. And so these three things pretty much cover everything that we want to deal with. So we've got, speech, language, feeding, motor planning, executive functioning, social pragmatic language, all of those things, right?
Yeah.
It's so
Yeah.
much.
The whole
So
enchilada.
how
Yeah.
in the world
A
can we
lot
do
of
that?
ingredients. A lot of ingredients. Plus, and the one that I'm thinking of, and I mean, I was at the schools for many years, I had a private practice, blah, blah, blah. I had them coming. Behaviors, just
Yeah,
behavior. And if you can't cut through the inattentiveness or, whatever you want to say,
right.
the others are not going to happen.
Yes.
And I want to get into conversation and the turn taking and the voice and all of that. I definitely want. Can you give me just a little bit about the behaviors? What can we do? How to
Yes.
structure it, or what it can you cut through? I mean, what can we do?
Right. So, I mean, that's the one thing in the research that therapists complain about the most when they've polled therapists for working with Down syndrome. What is it that's keeping you
Okay.
from or making you feel ineffective with your clients or with your students?
Huh.
And behavior is always the first one, right? Because
Wow. Okay.
that kind of stereotypical stubbornness that we used to call it.
Yes. Yeah.
And we used to
Run
shy
into that.
away from that, like, oh, you can't say that. Well, you can. We have
Yeah.
these phenotypes. It's now written where these behaviors we're seeing across the board with everyone with Down syndrome, obviously in a spectrum of use, right? Everybody's going to do it
Yeah.
differently. Some a
Yeah.
lot, some not so much.
Mhm.
And so we know that it exists. So just know that
Okay.
that's going to be there, but
Okay.
also knowing why. So I won't go into
Ah.
that too much, but why are these behaviors the way they are? And most of them are opting out, ignoring, leaving, eloping. They're not direct kind of um, acting out behaviors the way that you would think, but they
Uh-huh.
are more like, oh, I'm just gonna not do that. Right. And why is that? Well, we know that there's that intellectual disability piece. So that's part of it. But everything else that's really kind of shaping their ability to attend. And so the reason that the medical side of this is also important is they're not great at telling us how they feel physically.
Mm-hmm.
And part of that is because of low tone or dysarthria. They just don't have that sensory awareness very much. They may not have the language to tell us, even though most do. So I will argue that. Um, so why sometimes if they're acting out could be, my stomach hurts and sitting in this chair right now is really uncomfortable for me, but you're making me sit in this chair, but I can't tell you and I don't like it, so I'm not going to participate.
Mm-hmm.
Or I was doing this and I don't want to do something else, right? And so that's where that kind of social piece comes in. They really
Right.
love faces, they
Right.
love people, but in big groups, again, with practice, a lot of our little ones haven't had a lot of social practice, right? They're just kind of dragged along. They're not necessarily participating. And so getting
Hmm.
them to participate, which is why that inclusion was such a big deal, right? So put them in classrooms so they can
Sure.
model that behavior. And sometimes it just
Yep.
takes longer, right? It
Yeah.
just takes longer because everything is kind of delayed, even motor systems. So we can really kind of track behavior from the beginning. And then we have to know that they also, I call it learning the hard way, but it is these adaptive behaviors. So what does that mean? They tend to hold on to behaviors longer than they should. So they had a really good origin and now they're still going. And so the origins can be things like teething. So when I was teething, I started to kind of, grind my teeth or do something to kind of self-soothe, and those kind of take over. And I stopped talking as much. And so I kind of went back to sign
Hmm.
or some other ways of communicating. And maybe you were a baby that had, I see this a lot, like 500 signs, and they're really good at signing. But now they're 10 and they're not signing as much anymore, and no one around them is signing, and they're still kind of hanging on to that. And so behaviors can kind of show up
Interesting.
when we don't have the skills we need in certain areas of learning or social areas, right? So stores and different
Okay.
things like that. So what do we do about that?
Yeah.
We really do find that the easiest way is just to know what they like. So individually, what does this child like?
Yes.
How do I use that? Teletherapy, which is pretty much all I do now.
Hmm.
That it's much easier there because I can pretty much just put up a PowerPoint and I can learn what they like, and I can get pictures and videos and words and all of those things easier. So in the schools, it might be a little more difficult to do this. If you have the Power Rangers is their thing, that might be harder to find. But also putting them in with peers and maybe giving peers some of that so that peers are helping them in the classroom instead of peers and adults. Those guys are still there. We still need them, but maybe if they followed along with their peers a little bit more, because that's the piece
Okay.
that we don't always get. They're social,
Interesting.
but they don't have friends. And so that's this
Yeah.
huge divide. And why is that?
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, they didn't have that social kind of communication because they were doing these other communication types. So they kind of miss out on even socializing verbally in classrooms or wherever you are at the park, right? So they just don't have a lot of practice. And so putting a peer with them can often help if you're in the schools. And kind of understanding that those adaptive behaviors don't have to, how can we kind of get them closer to a more appropriate means of play or participation, for example? And the easiest way to do that is also to know what strengths of Down syndrome are. So once you know, okay, they're really good at this. So let's take music, for example. So the kind of overwhelming thing that everybody notices. One, everybody thinks that they're just kind of happy all the time, and they tend to be happier. But they also have a very, very keen love of music and rhythm. And so, how can we use those types of things to kind of rein them in a little bit, whether it be on a device or a phone or however you're doing therapy, but it can also be how we speak, right? So that melodic intonation piece in terms of how do we model language and speech for children with Down syndrome.
Okay.
I found that if
Okay.
we kind of sing it and we slow down a little bit, we're kind
Okay.
of giving them that piece that they like anyway. And we have to remember also that these kids have hearing issues sporadically throughout life, even if they
Yeah.
don't have ear infections, right?
Yeah.
We know that vision is often impaired, either vision like I need glasses or vision, how does my brain interpret what I'm
Mm-hmm.
seeing in classrooms?
Yeah.
Oftentimes we don't even think about that. So most
Mm.
of our behaviors have origin that we don't know anything about and we never think about.
Okay.
And so what do? Is we treat that child
Interesting.
behaviorally, and then we're surprised it doesn't work. Like,
Okay.
what is going on?
Wow. Wow. Okay.
Um,
All
and
of
even
that is
answering
so valuable.
questions can be a behavior where they don't answer a question. And a
Okay.
lot of times you're like, oh gosh, I thought they knew this, but they don't. No, they do. They know a lot more than they can tell us. But maybe the way that we approached that question didn't work for them. And so they kind of grab at something else. But really, I think
Interesting.
the bigger piece of that, we weren't going to talk about this, but I'll just stop on this one,
Okay.
is retrieval. They
Oh,
have a lot of information. They have high vocabularies. They love vocabulary. Learning new words, it's hilarious. They love it.
yeah.
I
Wow.
have a story about that when we can come back to, but um, it's harder to retrieve the information they have. So if you have difficulty retrieving
Interesting.
information that and we do this all the time, you and I are like, oh gosh, it was right there. I was going to say that.
Yeah.
But if you have trouble just retrieving vocabulary and then you're kind of put on the spot right there to answer questions, most of the time, because our kids are very visual, right? They learn better visually than auditorily. So
Okay.
classrooms, that can be tough. But if you have if you're
Yeah.
in a busy environment and you ask questions, a lot of times you're going to get answers that they just grab, and they're usually close. So maybe it's a question about a book or what we did yesterday. They're going to grab something that's kind of in their current mind right now, instead of the information that maybe they learned, like basic information. So they'll grab information and give wrong answers a lot of times. One, because it's hard to retrieve, or two, they're trying to guess what we want because we're targeting so many different
Ah,
things. Mom has me do it this way, the speech person has me do it this way.
interesting.
And so they're not always sure how they're supposed to respond to a question that to us seems very basic. But in
Okay.
certain environments, it can be
Huh.
really tough to retrieve those things when you need them quickly.
Okay. Wow.
And
Wow.
executive functioning and holding certain amounts of information is tough. So their
Yeah.
short-term working memory is also smaller. And I think I
Okay.
mentioned this last time, is that we can actually compare. This is actually old research from, I think, the 70s, 75 maybe, where we can compare MLU to how many things they can hold in your short-term memory. And so a lot of times even MLU can
Oh,
be a
yeah.
part of, right? So it's not necessarily a language thing, but I can't hold that right here long enough to answer your question, remember your question, formulate my answer, and then execute it. And
Yeah.
so within this huge kind of piece from here to here, there's so many things that can kind of go wrong. And if we don't know that about Down syndrome, we're often going to just assume these are, bad behaviors.
Wow. So good. So good. Thank you. Wow. Well, that was that was worth the price of admission.
Yeah, I know
Totally.
it's a lot.
Okay. Let's move into the other areas here, conversation, turn taking, voice, wherever you want to jump in. I mean, you hit upon conversation, maybe a little bit of turn taking. Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Let's
What do
get
we
into
do in
that.
early
What do we do?
intervention? Yeah.
Yeah.
So in early intervention, we're already kind of doing that, right? Everything is based on the questions that we ask to get answers. And as much as we want to say, don't do that, right? Don't quiz, just teach or interact.
Yeah.
It's kind of all we have when their lexicon is so small. And so what I try to train parents and other therapists in their very early stages is you have to give it back to me, right? You can't just kind of pull and go and point and grunt or get it yourself. You have to tell me what you want, and then I get it for you. And then we keep going. So that conversation just meaning that, okay, we're in this together. I'm going to ask you, you're going to ask me, we're going to kind of work this out. And so the reason that's important, and it sounds like we all know this and why, this isn't breaking news, but it's not what we're taught to do. In early intervention, what we're taught to do is go in there and facilitate communication. We're there to facilitate language learning. So we go in thinking that we have to just give them a language rich environment, right? And then that would be just fine. We'll just go in there, we'll do play, we'll sing, and they'll just learn that vocabulary and learn how to use it. But what we always forget to do is have them use it back, right? So we might do more and we have some signs. This is why your 11-year-old still does this, right? Because we didn't even expand it past maybe 10 signs that we use in early intervention for requesting. And so we have to start teaching speech super early. So not just
Yes, I
signing, not
agree.
just pictures, but pairing it with speech. And I know everyone knows that. You have to get it back. We need
Mhm.
speech attempts. So I'm constantly, and this is really what I started to see work. This is how I started. I was
Hmm.
like, okay, every parent wants this child to talk, so that's what I'm going to do. And I didn't know enough not to, because back then nobody was telling us not to do that. And so you this is how you say it, whether it be with tactile prompts, with high repetition of certain phrases or certain words in the environment, so that we can build that up so that by the time they're 3, we can get really closer to that 3, because MLU kind of follows age in the beginning, right? So they're saying 3 words at a time by the time they're 3. That's typical development. And so if we don't practice that at 1, we're not going to have, what are we going to have at 3? It just
Hmm.
gets harder. People are talking more and more and more and more. And so I just saw a question.
Yes, there is one that popped up there.
Yes. So in the beginning, it's going to be imitation, right? So in the beginning, you're going to have, say it like me. Here's how to say it. So for example, I have a bunch of 13-month-olds on my caseload right now. And each of them now has, I think the one I saw last time, about 5 words. And so they're rough. but their speech. And that is hi, so they're waving, right? That early hi.
Okay.
Bye, they're waving when something is over. We can say bye when we clean up. They're saying mama, they're saying dada, and we just keep going with that. And we're celebrating those things much more often than maybe we think we should. And when we're going in and we're using music and we these music classes, and it's very great, but we know through voice research that these children, it takes them, it's much harder to voice. And so they kind of have a really gruff presentation of speech, and it's kind of explosive instead of nice and clear. But the one thing that would help with that is singing, right? So we go to these music classes, but we never sing because it's often too fast, right? Or it's often maybe I learned this song in sign language. I'm not going to say it because talking is just a little bit harder for me. And so also trying to get singing involved with music. So can we put speech into everything we do in addition to all of the other ways of communicating, so that we can make sure that we get to that place where we can start to have grammar and syntax and specific vocabulary. I was with a five-year-old today who still uses animal sounds, for example. So he's got all his animals and he's telling me roar, nay, but he's not using the words, but he has them. And so we're coaching mom, okay, what is that? Nay, no. What is it? Horse. Oh, horse, horsey. And then he says horsey. So he changes it, right?
Yeah.
And so we're giving him, but we have to require it because we know it's in there. Why does he still go back to nay? Because he said it more.
Yeah,
He's been doing that for a long time, right? It's much more fun.
Yeah.
It's not a real word. I don't have to plan it.
Yeah.
It's easier to say. So, but that's what happens. And so we'll end up with a 10-year-old who still says nay for horse. And so we have to make sure that we're constantly doing what we know they can. And I think that when we take away speech, we take away in our own minds accidentally, we have fewer and fewer expectations of them. This is hard for them. They can't talk. And even without saying that ever, or even hearing it, when we're constantly pushing nonverbal communication, we all kind of come out on the other end going, yeah, speech is not going to work for these guys. And there's literally nothing that says that anywhere. There's all these issues with speech, but what if that child had the same amount of speech practice as a typically developing child, or even just more? All of the norms we have are based on not knowing what type of information or what type of intervention all those kids in the study have had. So we have this huge rainbow of kids that have had nothing to a lot. And what type of therapies have they had? And have those therapies been tailored specifically to Down syndrome? The answer there is no, because we don't have anything that most people don't know because there's no classes. There are now. But when we're not taught about it, we're just going to do what we know about other populations, which again is going to put us behind the 8 ball with people with Down syndrome. And we saw this in autism. I mean, the last 20 years have been explosive. Look what we've done and learned based on a specific, right? Just a specific diagnosis. My big push now is that really needs to become something that we specialize in, because there's a lot of people with Down syndrome. And most therapists have treated at least, I think it's 1 to 6 in the research, if you're not doing it all the time. But what would that look like if we knew how to specifically tailor based on what they're good at to help with what they're not good at, with that idea that, hey, this kid needs to get a job when he's 22. Because now people with Down syndrome are living into their 60s. That also means that they're outliving their parents for their first time.
Oh boy.
And so all of these medical things and all the advocacy that we've been doing, you're seeing people with Down syndrome everywhere now, right? Movies, ads, social media, where they're in the world now. And so our job is not just to advocate and love them and make everybody else love them and include them, wonderful things. Our job as SLPs is to get them ready to be 22. And we can't just start that when they're 18. And that's what's happening. So that speech, what you and I have done to get to our ability to talk like this, is just a ton of practice. And that's the one thing that we took out. And so they're not getting it. What would it look like if they did? And that kind of brings us to those other
Oh boy.
interventions that we need, because how in the world am I supposed to do all of this 20 minutes a week? And so
Yes.
we have that idea of dosage. And there's some things coming out of the UK that are pretty harsh. Basically, if you don't give the right dosage of therapy, then you might as well not even do it. That's kind of what they're saying.
Oh
Now,
dear.
I don't know if I can agree with that completely, but a lot of what we do doesn't work. And so it just gets left on the floor. And now we
Yeah.
have kids that really don't progress, and now insurance won't pay for it. And so it's this kind of,
We're stuck.
it's a huge snowball, especially right now with what's going
Yeah.
on with insurance. And I'm always having to
Mm.
do PARs with Medicaid. So I'll have to be like, wait, I know that they've had therapy since they were 2, but they haven't had any speech practice.
Yeah.
And that's what we're working on. That's why they still
Oh
need
boy.
this reading lab.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh man. Okay. All right. So conversation, turn taking, voice, the idea of clarity, bringing in voice rate, etc., frequency, prosody. I mean, wherever you want to go within that realm and giving us a little background and then hitting us with the practical would be
Okay.
wonderful.
I think someone asked, dosage is so hard in the school setting for this population. Yes, I feel
Mm,
for you guys. And I
yeah.
don't think, I don't know how popular this answer is, but it shouldn't rest at your feet. We know that most people with Down syndrome get their only therapy in schools. That should not happen. They really do need private therapists, or at least someone who's consulting with the family outside of school, because you cannot. And this particular area is where I see AAC use just flat out fail, is that we get devices in the school, and then that therapist leaves, and then the next therapist comes in, and maybe they don't like that device as well, so they change it and they want a different device. So every time the turnover in schools is high. And so sometimes you're not even dealing with the goals and the strategies that you would have chosen for half your caseload, right? You cannot do everything in the schools. But you can emphasize speech in the schools. So even in group sessions, maybe you're going to go round robin. So everybody's going to say their first name. Everybody's going to say their first name the way their name should be said. It sounds so simplistic, and it is, but how many people with Down syndrome can't say their own name so that a stranger would understand it?
Mm.
What can you do in that short amount of time that is going to give that kid a reason to make other people think he's capable? Your
Oh,
name is one of the first things, because that's what they're always
okay.
asked. What's your name? What grade are you in? Who's your teacher? What do you want for lunch? Those are your words. That's what you're working
Yeah.
on. And when they're
Yeah.
functional, you're going to have less behaviors. And if you're in a group and everybody takes turns and you're also helping your neighbor around and saying his name, what's your name, Jennifer? They all have to say Jennifer. I mean, these very basic ways of speaking that we all do within their, where they are with speech and language. So you don't, that's tough too, because you've got big talkers and less talkers, pair them.
Yeah.
We need peers. We need that ability to talk back and forth. Conversation is something that most of our adults can't engage in. Adults, we kind of forgot to teach it
It's very
because we just
sad.
quizzed. And so, how do you do that? That's really tough. How do you formulate friendships? How do you
Yeah.
get them ready when you're in the schools? And so, for our older kids, some of that social pragmatic stuff, even in the teen years, needs to happen. Can you have a conversation? Maybe we need to be the person that mediates the conversation, right?
Hmm.
And so, you just
Hmm.
have to kind of rethink based on the very basics of what this population doesn't do or doesn't have. And it doesn't need a test. We don't have any standardized tests for speech and language, thank God, in a way. So, what can you do instead? If they're saying one word at a time, that's your reason for therapy. If they're saying 2 words and they're 13 or 16 and they only can say 3 words at a time, or very telegraphic speech, um, obviously we don't need to test to know where they are. We need to work on that. We need to work on that classroom vocabulary, but we need to do it in a way that they're good at. So can they see the vocabulary? Hearing loss plus having an overactive visual system in a classroom is a nightmare. So lectures don't work. They have to participate in learning. And so if we know
Hmm.
that, we can make at least those learning opportunities similar here. And how can we make it social if they're in a group? And it might be, some things will be over their head and some things will be, right at their level. Can we pair them together? How can we get really creative so that all we're really doing is catering to strengths, which are visual? So reading is going to be the huge one. That changed my entire reading and voice are the two things that changed my whole outlook on in the last 10 years.
Really?
And so if we know those, so let's use them. Maybe we're all going to use melodic intonation when we do Red Robin and tell everybody what we're having for lunch, right? Maybe we're going to count and do some things that we need to know about time or early math. Can we do some of that? Our kids can count to 100, but they can't tell you how many feet they have, right? And money, that kind of gets in there too. And we don't deal with money as much anymore because, or telling time on a clock, thank goodness, because we have cards and we have digital watches. So we don't necessarily need those things. But how do you do that? How do you know if a child is reading? Is it your job to teach a child to read? That is individual school, regulations or whatever. We're supposed to be working on speech anyway, which it is. But the magic of reading, Sue Buckley is the person who really kind of started this. She's out of the UK. And I heard her speak one time and I think she said the word cross, which I loved. I always get a bit cross when I learn that people aren't working on reading. And I was like, yes, that's exactly right. Because if you can read, think about what that's going to do for you in the long term. Everything we do is reading. We don't talk on the phone much anymore. We text. Can they text a message? Can they answer a message? Are you almost done? Yes. Can they do an emoji? Maybe that's what we need to work on. So reading is really is a gateway to a lot of other things. And we all read. Words are everywhere. You don't need a specific device. In the early years, you need a pen and a stack of cards or some books. And so what reading is an AAC device. It clues them into what to say. So my name is, you're going to have that written out, right? Their names are everywhere. They usually can at least see their name and know that that's their name, right? So my name is blank. And we write that out. You're much more likely to get that phrase if I write it than if I just ask you. If I ask you, you're going to say Jennifer, because that's what everybody says. But you're not going to say my name is Jennifer. We don't really say that anyway. It's kind of a goofy thing to work on, but just as an example. But I can read it. Yeah. So a child that can only say one or two words at a time due to either breath support or executive functioning or lack of practice can now read a phrase. And if I read that phrase 200 times in the next month, I'm probably going to be a little bit better at actually using it when somebody asks me that question compared to just what my name is. And so, oh, what's your name? John. Oh, you forgot to use your phrase. My name is John, right? We do that forever. And it doesn't always kick in. And we're like, gosh, they know this. Well, sometimes just adding that visual piece is huge. And if you have someone who is not reading it, you can still use it. I always forget people's first names. Cuban, she did most of this work with pacing boards. And so you have 3 circles, for example, and those 3 circles are a 3-syllable word or a 3-word phrase. But if I can see those 3 circles, my name is, and then blank for my name, I'm much more likely to point to those circles and say something later. So it doesn't even have to be the words initially. And then they do learn words, whole words at a time. So they're not necessarily breaking them up by phonics, because you and I don't do that either. No kid ever learned what their name was by breaking it apart by sounds. No one does that. That's something that we invented after talking existed. And so what we're doing initially is seeing, that's my name. What's my name? Jennifer, that's my name. I don't need to know J-N-F-R. And I don't need to learn to spell it yet either. But after looking at it and learning my letters, that J is going to clue me into the sound I'm supposed to say, because J says J. So you have to do some of that, right? So here's a visual system, much like an AAC system, that is telling him what to say, but it's also telling him what to do. And so using reading a lot is a way to get them talking. And if you say, just like you're learning, not even another language, let's just say you're in school for speech therapy and these phrases and this vocabulary is very new to you. If you say that vocabulary and phrases or you're writing it a lot, that comes out when you're in a conversation with a parent about that child. You didn't have to plan it. You didn't have to find your notes. you had that neuroplastic response to knowing how to say that. And so
Right.
neuroplasticity, this idea that how does the brain change? How do we learn? Repetition, doing it a lot. That's
Yes.
really
Yes.
all. But our kids aren't doing it a lot.
Well, you know what, Jennifer? I'm sitting here thinking, as a school speech language pathologist, now I was, in the schools when going into the classroom, especially, self-contained classes was popular. People did it, they had time to do it, etc. I don't know if going in, talking with the teachers, maybe going in, doing a joint, conversation
Oh, yes.
session, or maybe he or she is doing some reading, teaching of reading or whatever, but maybe just working on those things together,
Right.
and both of you can kind of bounce off of one another, and you can share things that and you can
Right.
have things that you could reinforce,
Right.
that
And
they're
that's
that they're doing in
something,
the class.
yeah, and we know that in the research, teachers complain about that problem a lot. And even with devices, it's worse because they have to know each type of device. And then how do you do
Yes,
that in a group? I mean, I know there's ways and
that
there's
is.
classes you
I
can
know.
learn this,
Yeah.
but if a teacher knows that they can read, imagine what that leads to, what a classroom would look like. We have words all over classrooms now, right? One warning
Yeah.
about that: if you're
Most.
visually, if you're, you're really acute visually, and you're in a very, very, very visual environment, our kids sometimes will shut down
Yeah.
because
Overdose.
there's
Yeah.
so much that they don't know
Yeah.
what to look at. So something I'll do with words also on index cards, or
Okay.
if you have flashcards, I'll just put three out. So on the floor or on a desk, and you just ask for which one you're saying. Which one says cat? Which one says dog? And then I add to that. So now they might have to have maybe a two-step sequence. So find me the dog and the cat. But now there's five cards, and one says car, and one says ball, and one says something else. So that's all that short-term memory again, but also that vision system to learn what to ignore and what to attend to, right? So we know that, like autism, it's hard to know what to attend to when there's a lot of stuff going on.
Yeah.
And that behavior piece they can shut down, or they can
Okay.
start giving a lot of wrong answers because I don't want to give you the dog and the cat because I really like the word ball. I'm going to get ball because I like ball. But the therapist didn't know that. The therapist just assumed they're not participating or not attending. And we also know that their auditory processing isn't great because of hearing loss over time. Um, and so all these other things are kind of coming into play. But what you'll find is once you know these things and you're working, it'll start to come to you. You'll have ideas that are easier. I used to keep index cards in certain books. So when we open the book, the cards are there. Are we recognizing some of these words, pointing to words in books, but using books that are roughly around what you would expect for their MLU? So are you going to use Sandra Boynton books, or are you going to use Dr. Seuss? Don't use Dr. Seuss. Right? There's paragraphs. There's paragraphs on each page.
Yeah.
So the fewer words might be better. High repetition, rhyming books. That's the whole reason we do rhyming, is because that auditory processing sounds like this, but isn't this.
Things on you.
Vowels
Yeah.
hold the most information on what we say and what we read, not the consonants necessarily. And our kids tend to, because of hearing, have really neutral vowels all the
Hmm.
time. And so
Mm-hmm.
I'm hearing kit, but the word was cat. That happened to me yesterday.
Really?
Because this child has really neutral vowels. He's not giving very clear vowels. And a lot of that is the anatomy and physiology of the oral cavity and everything else. There's a lot of reasons for it. But you don't have to know those specifically. And that kind of brings us to that voice piece, is what's causing that lack of clarity. So we have this, okay,
Yes.
how do they learn? What's the language that we expect?
Mm-hmm.
What's the language for where they are in that environment, their age, all these other ideas. But when we get to that speech piece, what is it really that's keeping us from understanding what they are saying? And when I was really starting to look at this as I was working with older kids, so teens, um, parents were coming back like, I don't know what is going on, but they're harder to understand now for some reason. And there's 10,000 reasons for that, right? As you get older and puberty and voices change, and now you're smarter, but your MLU might still be low. And so everything can get weird. So when I started really listening and watching what was causing the disturbance and why, because alone they can say all the words perfectly, put them in a sentence and it was tougher. And so that's anatomy and physiology, but it's also voice. Their voices tend to be more harsh. They tend to be, we perceive them as having a lower than optimal pitch. They force everything out really hard. And so that's one reason MLU is short. But they have a vocal quality that really kind of hurts clarity. And so what is it about voice? What is voice? It's rate. So our kids, you'll have the kid that goes really fast, right? Or he talks a lot, but you catch a word here and there, right? And that's that prosody piece. So our kids are taught to be monotone. And this is the problem with devices. The research says that the device is saying the same thing over and over in the same voice helps them. Well, it also helps them not learn prosody.
Yeah.
So that
Yeah.
you
Good
can
point.
miss, and I wish in the courses I'll do this where I'll okay, say this word, and then you hear it and you're like, whoa, I wasn't even close. But what happened was they put the stress on the wrong syllables. They'll put the stress on a different word than we were expecting it to. A question, a rising intonation is flat, so we miss the question. Or they only use rising intonation when they're supposed to be answering a question. And just this rhythm piece, even some research calls Down syndrome a disorder of rhythm.
Really?
Fluency is extremely high in this group, and it kind of comes and goes.
Yes. Okay. Yeah.
And then, but if you're not doing a lot of talking and we're not really looking at voice and quality of voice and what I can do with my voice, we kind of miss that piece, and we kind of go, gosh, maybe we need to go back to articulation, right? I think we're not doing that as much as we used to, but parents still tell me, okay, what are you working on at school? And the answer I always get is, I think we're working on L. I think there's some L words, or, the parents are kind of thinking of the sounds still. Because if we don't know Down syndrome, most of us, again, are going to go back to what we know. And we tend to think that if you're not understandable, then we have an artic issue. And there might be articulation problems. But I promise you, you can still understand a child who's using the right rate, has some good prosodic markers, whose articulation is terrible, and they have final consonant deletion. You're still going to be able to understand them if we have accurate vowels, we have context, and we have the prosodic information to help us know that they just said tricycle.
Yeah.
Even if it's Eichel or Eichel.
Yeah,
still
it's
gonna,
intent.
tricycle, right?
Yes.
And so now we practice tricycle, and maybe we practice tricycle 500 times and we're taught not to drill. The cool thing about Down syndrome is they kind of like drill.
It's too bad.
And it's kind of strange. You wouldn't expect them to, but they do, because they end up getting good at it. These kids don't get to be good at something. And when they are, that's what you're going to get. They're going to do it a lot. And so one thing you'll often see in this kind of tangential language, expressive language, where they're constantly going back to a certain topic when you're not on that topic, right? And so everything is, I don't know why Power Rangers is on my brain right now, but everything will be in that medium. We're kind of taught to follow their lead and kind of go there, but in a school setting, for example, that might not be the wisest thing, because I promise you, I have 18-year-olds who want to talk about Power Rangers because they still watch the show 3 times a day. So there's all these other things, or appropriate language, appropriate topics. We kind of forget that maybe that's something we should also work on. So for like social goals, we're too old for that now. Even if our intellect is still there, we almost have to discourage some topics. And so that's just kind of a side note there. You use it, but that's an adaptive behavior. You used it in the beginning because it got their attention. Well, now you have their attention. And so maybe we can expand from there. What are they doing, for example, instead of, acting it out? Maybe you're telling me, because your kids will still act things out. And so that's one way. I forgot to take the water.
Okay. While you are sort of paused, there have been some good comments and a question. If you want to read those last 3. These are power words.
I like that a lot.
Yes.
I'm using that. I'm not in school, so I miss out on the new language that SLPs use, and I love it. Sometimes I'm like, oh, that's great.
Yeah, I like it too.
Somebody mentioned that prosody with AAC devices. Yeah, again, another
Yeah.
adaptive behavior. They help us in the beginning because it's the same every time, but we don't talk like that. And our kids tend to sound robotic. You can almost tell what they've worked on as an SLP in the past. You're like, I think he did that in therapy. Um, should speech goals be more general and less phoneme based with older students? Looking more at rate and prosody. Yes. So let me think. This one pops in my head all the time. She was 13 at the time. And we were talking, this is a client of mine, and we were talking about what she's going to do over the summer. And she kept telling me she's going to Merlin. Like Merlin. And maybe I said this on your show before, but I was like, gosh, I cannot figure this out. And mom, it's teletherapy. So mom would be in the other room. And so I'm kind of yelling at her to come in. And she's like, oh, no, no, no. We're going to Maryland. And I was like, oh my gosh. All I saw was the wizard in my head. And I'm like, I can't.
Oh,
She kept saying it and saying it, saying it. The
yeah.
funny part about that story for me, though, is people from Maryland kind of say it like that. And
Some of
so,
them. I used to live in Maryland.
yeah, it's kind of
Yeah.
two instead of three.
Yeah,
But
Maryland.
the
Yeah.
lack of that syllable threw, I could not, it didn't matter anything else she said because it was the content, right? So, yes, looking at that rate and prosody. And the neat part about that is all you really have to do is model it. And so with LSVT, which you mentioned in my bio, that's a program I found when I was trying to figure this out. And so
Hmm.
what that does is it gives you, here's that thing with the I forgot with reading. So reading, but the voice piece is you want techniques, especially in the schools. You need one technique that can hit 20 different things.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have enough time to do everything. So you need a technique that can do
Yeah.
language and speech all at the same time. Reading does that,
Good.
because we already talked about that piece of it. But simply changing how you talk with LSVT, it's loud, right? So if I just talk a little louder, I automatically slow down and over articulate, and I use the right ending in my voice when I stop. Do you understand? Right? See, so the music came in
Mm-hmm.
and not yelling, but just a little bit louder gave me all of those things. So they were saying it, but we weren't understanding it. And this works for a 2-year-old and this works for a
Interesting.
30-year-old. Now, a lot of people are
Interesting.
like, oh my gosh, this is the last thing I want these kids to be is louder. And it's not necessarily what we mean, but you're not just louder, you're also bigger. So you're going to over articulate, you're going to have a much bigger mouth. And remember, these kids are visual and they love music. And so when you're louder, or you can be bigger or you can be stronger, that's a word we can use, your strong voice, say it like me. And we keep doing that. And that's our cue. All you have to tell a teacher is, okay, this is what we're calling it. Try that again using your loud voice. Try that again using your strong voice, your big voice, whatever works for
I
that
like that big
child.
voice. Okay.
It's an
I like
immediate,
that.
oh, I can use that right now, much like we do in stuttering therapy, right? Okay,
Yeah.
right now you need your easy nonsense because this is a hard
Right.
day. So having that to be able to kind of hit all of those speech
Okay.
problems, right? You can do
Okay.
even softer or whispering. And the common thread there is that my breath has to sustain me through that. Melodic intonation or talking louder without pulsing each word or
Mm-hmm.
syllable requires that I can modulate sound. And so
Yeah.
with LSVT, if you know about that program or you are going to use it, the very first thing we're doing is just holding vowels. So
Mm-hmm.
loud and as long as you can, that are healthy vocal loudness, not screaming, not hurting the voice, but just an ah. It's shocking how hard that is for our kids because they really don't have practice sustaining breath or phonation.
Okay.
So holding that, holding O, holding E,
Yeah.
and now they're
Well,
giving
you've
you
got the
big movements and that
hearing,
visual
hearing piece, and
hearing.
also the lung piece.
Yep. Yep. We think now the research is telling us that people with Down syndrome are living in a state of hypoxia at all times. And it's because their red blood cells are bigger.
Yeah.
And so they're not metabolizing oxygen the way you and I do. So that's part of
Wow.
the slowness, we think. Um,
Okay. Interesting. Oh,
and I'm in
that's
Colorado,
interesting.
so it even gets more. But
Yeah.
but
Higher up.
teaching that, having that foundational level at which I can say more than a word at a time, but how do I do that? Use your phrases, use your words, use your longer, oftentimes kids again are like, I don't know what she wants from me. So you do what's really simple. What can they see? Does it have a music piece into it? Is it something that I understand really quickly without having to remember a bunch of stuff? Loud does that. Quiet does that. Whisper does that. Whatever
Mm-hmm.
the word is. And reading does that because here it is in front of me. It's a cheat sheet, right? I can do this. And then
Yeah.
neuroplasticity for both of those things is you do it over and over and over. I mean, high repetition. How do you do that in the schools? You can put it on doors, you can put it everywhere. There's all sorts of ways you can do this, not just in the program itself. But if I practice it enough, my brain will start to change and adapt to that way of talking. We hear what we want to hear as we're saying it. The one thing kids with Down syndrome don't do is self correct. We do
Hmm.
that. They don't hear their own errors ever. And so they
Really?
just keep going. That's why they just talk and then they're waiting because what they've
Wow.
learned most of the time is they're waiting for us to step in and tell them to say it again or to
Yeah, I
say
know.
it a certain way,
Yes, I
right?
know. I know.
And they
Yeah.
just keep going
Get
and we're
that.
like, oh my Lord, what do I do with this? Because we never
Yeah.
stopped them. If you practice a phrase, your name, if I say Jennifer 500 times, I promise you next time it's going to be really clear.
Yeah.
You can do that with certain phrases, right? And you
Yeah.
start there. But here's what people are always afraid of. Um, it won't be something that they can use right away. I just forgot the word. Um, it won't carry over. It won't be something that just becomes in their lexicon. And when I was doing LSVT, the second I knew it worked was when I saw the same girl, the Merlin girl. She was my first. Um, oh wait, sorry. And she said it again. And I was like, because I that was the moment I knew that it was working because she caught herself. She'd said it so many times,
Did
whatever the
she?
word was. She said it so
Wow.
many times. She said it wrong. She heard herself. She stopped. I even have a video of it. She stopped and then she said it again the right way.
Wow.
So it does
Wow.
work. That's how we learn. That's how a 2-year-old
Wow.
without Down syndrome learns to talk. It's really simple.
Yeah.
But if they're
Yeah.
not talking, why in the world would we expect them to talk?
Yeah.
It won't just show up. That's the other
No.
piece of Down syndrome. It
No.
won't show up and it will go away. It's not like riding a
Mm.
bike. So the
Yeah.
kid that you discharge at 8 comes back at 16, it's not there anymore because
Yeah.
you and I talk all day. These kids that we see giving speeches with Down syndrome, running marathons, the ones that are really good at talking, they're taking acting classes, they're taking music classes, they're practicing their lines, they're talking all the time. The difference between the person that can and can't. Now, I'm not talking about the child who is nonverbal for reasons that we can't change. Just your kind of run of the mill person is capable of that if they have enough practice. But we're so busy doing all this other language stuff that we skip it. Now that we have some of the language and the intelligence, our speech is still pretty low. And so that's that gap, right? And
Okay.
so that's why
Wow.
I'm one of the only people out there really pushing speech instead of communication.
Yeah.
Because I mean, it's all the same, but that speech piece has to be a bigger part of what we do
Yeah. Yeah.
at
It's
every
it's an emphasis. Yeah. It's an emphasis. Oh, I love this. Oh, I could just listen to you. And yeah, I wish we could just keep going. But yeah, we kind of need to wrap up here. Does anybody have any other questions or anything? Oh, Jennifer, I love I love your points of view. I love your brain. I like the way you think. Okay, it makes so much sense. And I can look back on my years of working with individuals with Down syndrome, which I always loved working with them. But oh, I wish I could go back,
I know.
and
I do too.
apply.
Every time I learn
Yeah,
something, I'm like, oh,
I
I
know.
would have known that. That
Yeah,
would have been so
yeah.
much so helpful. Yeah.
I know, I know. Oh my gosh. Well, thank you, thank you, thank you. And, at some point we need to do a part three. Okay. But I
Okay.
want to have you back. I just love this. You are an absolute wealth of information. Thank you for your practical ideas, your information, just the way that you're packaging things and the aha moments. Thank you so much.
And you
I
can
really
find a lot of
appreciate
this
it.
stuff on my website.
Ooh,
And you
tell
can
us, tell
email me.
us.
So connectedspeech.org.
Okay.
I'm also under Gray's Peak Therapy, but there's not as much on that site. So connectedspeech.org, not com,
Org.
.org.
Okay.
And that's where you'll see the book. And then I go to the blog section and you'll see some of these things. And I'll put something
Yes.
from this podcast on there too. So I know it's a lot of information in a very short amount of time. So I
know.
also answer emails. So I love it when therapists email me. It's
Okay.
kind of a fun way to learn. And I also offer coaching to SLPs as well as families and
Perfect.
people with Down syndrome. So
Oh, love it, love it. Well, and your new book, and it's on Amazon.
it is. My girl
Yeah.
one is not on yet, so it's boy and girl. If the
Okay.
next ones will kind of be everybody, but right now I did it for gender. But yes, you can go on
Okay.
Amazon.
Okay. All right. What are some of these others? Let's say amazing presentation. Yes, yes, you're
Yes, yes,
great.
yes.
Is it possible to do a session where we watch you work with students?
I read that wrong. I thought you meant watch you, but watch me. I have not done that.
Yeah,
That's kind of a
watch
good idea.
you.
Yes, I
Ooh.
usually I'll go or I'll be, on the screen when you're in session with like a parent or something. I do that a lot, but
Mm-hmm.
I haven't done that. I'll have to think about
Mm.
that.
Interesting, interesting. Well, okay, perfect. I love it. In closing, I do want to thank everyone for being here, for tuning in, for getting the word out about the SpeechLink podcast. And you're in a few days, you'll be able to access this course again through Speech Therapy PD. You can come back and rewatch it if you want. Or while you're driving, just access the audio only version on most of the popular podcast apps. And I do appreciate your very supportive comments and your good reviews on those apps. So, Jennifer, thank you again. Thank you, and thank you to all of you. I hope that you know how very appreciated all of you are. Thank you for all you do for your therapy kids. See you soon. Bye bye.